Hello and welcome to the international programme. Have you ever wondered what the beautiful wrought iron signs hanging from some of the buildings here in Herzogenaurach mean? In this month's report, we're going to be looking at the history of these signs and symbols.
If you really take a look around in our old town, you'll see that there's a lot of history on display there. In fact, it's like an open-air museum. Some of the exhibits like the Turmer's Tower and the Fein Tower are hard to miss, as are the beautiful half-timbered buildings. You can also spot parts of the old fortifications if you know where to look. But there are also a lot of smaller treasures like paintings and other decorations on buildings, as well as the wrought iron signs that you see on many of the shops that just blend into the background.
So here in Herzogenaurach,
We met Julie Kahler in the Volkshochschule, as well as in the Old Town, where she took us through the history of some of these signs, starting at the castle.
at the entrance to the castle, above where the drawbridge used to be, is the coat of arms of the Prince Bishop of Schönborn. And if you look at that, the small coat of arms in the centre, showing the striding lion, is the original coat of arms of the Earls of Schönborn. The lion with the diagonal stripe is a sign of the Bishopric of Bamberg, and the wheel with 6 spokes is a sign of the Archbishopric of Mainz. And additionally, there are 3 small coats of arms representing the barony of Reichelsberg, and there's 3 small rhombus or diamonds that represent the barony of Heppenheim. And that was all given back to the Schönborn clan after the Heppenheim family had died. What's interesting is that on top of the coat of arms, usually you would have an emperor's crown, but this has the Prince Elector's hat because he was the Prince Bishop. And behind the shield, there's a sword and a crozier, so a hooked bishop's staff, and that's crossed diagonally. So this lovely wrought iron sign hanging on the side of the Fein Tower is Herzogenaurach's coat of arms, and it has quite a nice history. In 1021, King Henry II, who had then become emperor, donated the royal court of Aurach, as it was known then, to his newly founded bishopric of Bamberg. So this sign features the Bamberg lion. And from 1300s onwards, all the signs that were made after that all had the Bamberg lion on it. And from the 17th century, the lion is striding a diagonal stripe and is showing his claws. This is in black wrought iron, but in colour we have the shield, which is coloured gold. The lion is black and his claws are red, which we think are a reference to the Templar Knights who are here in Herzogenaurach. And those are now our town colours, gold, black and red. Here in Herzogenaurach, not only do we have wrought iron signs, there are also some paintings on the buildings which are also very symbolic. Here in Marketplace, number 3, on the corner of this beam you can see fertility symbol. And there's also the 8-sided star, there's a compass wheel, a sun, and all of those represent the different suns in the different seasons of the year, usually around the equinox. And on the other side of the building, we have this twisted pole, and there's a figure at the top. And quite often these figures represented the citizen who lived in the house. And there's also a painting which represents a barber surgeon. Barber surgeons were very important in Middle Ages. In this building, which is the Volkshochschule building, this was originally a bathhouse, only 1 story downstairs. And there was a barber surgeon, a barder, who helped the citizens bathe. He had treatments for them if they became ill. He had qualifications, but was not as academic as a doctor was, and was responsible for the health and hygiene of the everyday citizen. There's also a sign for a town musician, because a town musician went everywhere and supported fetes and fairs, and different people made announcements when someone was coming to town. So You can see from having these signs different people who lived in the house and the trades that they carried out. And these signs represent the guilds and the craft and the standard of professionalism that the guilds upheld. Now, guilds were associations of either craftsmen or merchants, and they were responsible for setting standards, professional standards, and the practices of each of the different crafts or trades. The merchant guilds were associated with any of the traders. The craft guilds were any of the citizens who had learnt a skill or a craft, such as shoemaking or weaving or a butcher or baker. And the citizens who made up membership of the guilds chose someone to represent them, who became the Burgermeister, the first mayor. And he had to be a member of a guild because he was also responsible for making sure that all these standards were maintained. And so to prove that they had the quality, they developed these signs and symbols for each of the different trades. So if anybody knew that this person or this company was part of a guild, they knew they were getting quality. Also, guilds formed the basis of the universities today. The very first universities in Bologna, in Paris and in Oxford were groups of students and masters who began to study there, and they were all members of guilds. And in order to become a member of the guild, they had to go through certain training, and this was all regulated by the guilds themselves. So first of all, they had a type of apprenticeship, which usually lasted about 3 years, where they learnt all the basics of their trade. And then you were expected to become a journeyman, and you had to go away from where you lived and get experience in other areas. So you could go to a different state, you could even go to another country. And after you had got lots of experience working for other masters, you could come back to the town where you started off and produce a masterpiece, a Meisterstück, to prove that you had the skills necessary to also be awarded the title of master. And once you were a master, you could then train other young people in the trade. So it was a way of upholding the standards as well of training. And one of the most well-known journeymen here in Herzogenaurach was, of course, Christoph Dassler. And he ended up in Gera, which was the centre of machine cloth making, to get more experience, and came back to Herzogenaurach as a cloth maker. Here in the 17th century in Herzogenaurach, there were 10 guilds. There were the bakers, millers and flour merchants. There were the beer brewers and the coopers, the ones who made the barrels. There were blacksmiths, locksmiths, wheelwrights. There were bricklayers and carpenters, butchers, the cloth makers and dyers, of course, linen and fustian cloth weavers. There were the shoemakers, the tailors, and the tanners. So we have all these different professions and guilds, and in English we have this little nursery rhyme, rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub, and who do you think they be? The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and they all set out to sea. And so there's a lot of talk about who is the most important craftsman. Is it the baker, is it the butcher, or is it someone else? Butchers were very important, although meat was very expensive. And it depended on your status as a citizen, depended not only if you ate meat, but what type of meat you ate. So for instance, we have lamb and we have mutton from sheep. So lambs are very valuable because a lamb will grow up and you can shear it, and it's very valuable for its wool. And in a town such as Herzogenaurach, where there was a lot of cloth making, a young sheep was a very valuable thing. So eating meat from lamb would be very expensive, so only very rich people could afford to eat lamb. Whereas mutton comes from an old sheep. That sheep isn't producing much wool anymore, or perhaps it's died of natural causes, of old age. And then the meat from an old sheep is much cheaper, so it was more affordable for other people. Bakers were also really important because one of the staple foods in village life was bread. And also the brewers. There were lots of beer brewers, and we still have some signs where you can see where the beer brewers were in the high street, and you can see hops hanging off the edge of it, which indicates that they brewed beer and wine. There were also guest houses, which were usually owned by brewers, and beer was brewed much more prolifically than it is nowadays, and it was a different type of beer, but because it contained yeast, it had vitamins and minerals and was, a source of nourishment for a lot of people. Nowadays, of course, we only have one local brewer, Bierfabrikant. Then there was the blacksmith, and without a blacksmith, none of the other craftsmen could carry out their craft, because a carpenter, a builder, they all need tools. A baker needs knives. Everybody needs something made of metal. In our high street, there are two blacksmiths who both had a forge. We have Drebinger, and we can see today. Drebinger has this beautiful wrought iron arch above its gateway. And within this arch, you can see all the 7 higher skills that a blacksmith needed to be able to practice his craft and really be the king of all craftsmen. And then there was the Zehlein forgery, which originally made things like horseshoes, nails, clips, pins, metal pins. And in the 1960s, Christoph Zehlein decided that he would like to try something more artistic. This sign hanging on the side of the Fane Tower looks as though it's very, very old. But in fact, it can't be very old at all, because it was made by Christoph Zehlein, probably in the second half of the 1900s. He also made the sign which is in front of the butcher shop, which also looks as though it comes from medieval times. Here in the town, there are also some signs. Some of the hangings themselves are very old and original, but some of the bits in the middle, the content has been changed, you could say. And up at the church square, we have a hairdresser who also has a beautiful wrought iron sign, and hanging from it are strands of hair, a pair of scissors and a comb. And it's only actually hung there since November 2014. So it's a very modern piece of art. So the signs and symbols that decorate some of these buildings aren't as old as you think. They were based on really old motifs. But in fact, some are old and some are relatively new. It's quite surprising.
These reminders of the guild system, whether old or new, are still all around us today. The signs don't just mark the places of business, they also embody the quality that was the cornerstone of the products and services provided by the members of the guilds. So the next time you're on the high street, maybe glance up and take a closer look at these intricate signs. There is so much we can learn about the history of the town and the people who lived here if we just look at the buildings more.
Thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.